From delivering papers to building materialized use in Oracle database. This is Confluent Developer.
One of these things that it's arguably more difficult than it has to be, but it is very, very flexible. That's the flip side of it. A ton of people have that problem and benefited from that write-up. So that was a satisfying one to fix. And like people will be taking that and then like, well, let's just move that through into production because I found this thing on the internet that says it, which is like awful.
In this episode of Confluent Developer, I interview my friend and colleague Robin Moffatt about his past, present, and future. How Paperboy in his younger years become an expert in Oracle databases and Apache Kafka, Kafka Connect, and stream processing. Hello and welcome. My name is Viktor Gamov with Confluent, and this is Confluent Developer. I'm your host today, and I'm thrilled and excited, and I cannot even express with my word because my vocabulary is not that rich with English language. But I do have my friend and colleague Robin Moffatt today with me. Robin, welcome to Confluent Developer.
Thanks for having me, Vic.
For those 5 people who are watching us, probably there would be 2 who never heard your name before. Can you just quickly introduce yourself, what you do? And, it's very rare that people don't know who you are, but still, maybe, when my mom would listen, she would like to learn who are you and where are you coming from?
Yeah, so I'm Robin. I'm based in the UK, as you can tell from my accent, the north of the UK. I'll try and speak a bit more clearly than usual. And I work at Confluent. I've been working with kind of Kafka and Flink and stuff like that. Back in 2017, I originally joined Confluent. And I've been working with data in general for over 20 years now.
Little unknown fact, everything that I learned about Kafka in the very beginning of Kafka, I learned from Robin. I was following Robin way before I joined Confluent and way before Robin started doing official developer relations. When I think Robin was with partner engineering, and you were engaging with customers and partners.
Yeah, that's right. That's before I even knew that DevRel was a thing. Like it was just, I spoke at conferences, I wrote blogs, and then someone pointed me to this DevRel track at a conference, and the rest is history.
Yeah, we were doing DevRel without it was a thing. Before it was a thing, one of the famous demos that I also basically built my reputation on top is Robin's demo of processing streams of tweets when the Twitter was a thing and the fire hose were not expensive.
Yeah.
So you could use the Twitter fire hose without robbing a bank. But it's great to have you on the show. Many of you who are watching us hopefully watched the Robin's videos. Robin known to be a go-to person about the Kafka Connect and how to bring virtually any source from anywhere in the world into Kafka and process this with SQL. We always have this conversation. Robin, you should start using Java. And he's like, no.
You can do plenty enough with a bit of config and some SQL. Enough for me, anyway.
Exactly. And I'm always wondering, and now many of you already watched the few first episodes, you understand the premise. We would like to talk a little bit about the origins of the excellence that you are today and how everything starts, like humble beginnings. So could you tell us what was your first job? It not necessarily needs to be an IT job, because we discussed different ways how the host and co-host and other guests were gaining first money. Can you talk us about what your first experience for making some bucks?
And I heard the episode that Addy did. And say again?
Or pounds, I don't know.
Pounds, pounds sterling. So I was thinking about this beforehand, and there's my first job out of university and blah, blah, blah. But my first actual job, and you saying that was when I earned some money, was as a paperboy. So I don't know if you even get them anymore. You're probably not allowed to. But news agents, you you get 50 pence for delivering newspapers, and you'd be out there in the wind and rain. And it was a good job. But it's a shame that kids don't get to do that anymore. I think it's character building.
We don't have a paper boys here as well. There's a guy rides around in a van and throws paper.
Yeah.
So there's no boys who riding bikes and bringing paper to you anymore. And but what was the what was the moment where you kind of like bound yourself to computers in IT? Like, what was your first IT job, just for
So that
for
was
starters?
that was before university, actually. So I've always mucked around with computers, and I got a job for a local college doing work on their website. So this is going back a long time. So this is
Which year
like
it was? What year it was?
1995,
I was
96,
wondering
like that kind of time.
what was the technology stack on this website?
So this was HTML written by hand, and then a bit of Dreamweaver as well, if you remember
Oh,
that.
Dreamweaver. Yes, I remember.
Which it wrote absolute junk, but it could do some quite clever effects. So a mixture of those two, and then like FTPing things to get them up onto servers, and like it was. You'd look back on it now and it's like kind of ridiculous, but then almost with like static site hosting, it's like we kind of
We're
gone
doing
full
this
circle. Where
today exactly
yeah.
like this. The GitHub pages, Vercel or Netlify, whatever. We're doing exactly this. We FTP in, but like in
Yeah.
this case, it's not FTP. It's a little bit more safer. But the idea is the same. I also used Dreamweaver as my first HTML editor, my first web page. That it was not a website. I was building a, remember the CD-ROMs? They
CD-ROMs,
have
yeah.
this like auto start
Yeah.
.inf,
Yeah.
and I was building like auto start script. So when the CD-ROM would be inserted, it has a bunch of the pieces of software that I gain through different sources, which would not be named, and I build with the HTML, build this intro screen. So when you joined Confluent, you already was very established in the world of databases. You was part of the group of luminaries that Oracle recognizes, called Oracle ACE, right?
Yeah.
And can you talk? So I think we're going to talk about databases a lot. I don't know. I have this feeling, but the premise of this podcast is that what was the most interesting problem you ever solved, or you didn't solve, but it still kind of bothers you until today. So I would be curious about this problem that you solved
Yeah.
with the technologies of that time.
Now, a quick word from our sponsor. Confluent Developer, the podcast, is brought to you by Confluent Developer, the website, which has everything you need as a developer of data streaming systems. And it's completely free. We've got curriculum, hands-on exercises, executable tutorials, the online data streaming engineer certification, also free, a way to find a meetup near you, those are free. Everything is there. I really want you to be successful in your journey as a data streaming engineer, and this is the site that has what you need. Check it out at developer.confluent.io. That's developer.confluent.io. Now back to the show.
So that's a good question. And so before I was at Confluent, I was a consultant. And so kind of like by nature, you end up seeing lots and lots of different challenges, like going around from different customers each week on week. I think the one that kind of like sticks in my mind is actually, even before I was a consultant, I was working for a retailer and like building a data warehouse. And we were working with Oracle 11G, I think it was, and building out materialized views. And it was one of these things where, and like the Oracle community was kind of rich. And
Rich
you have to be rich to run
monetary?
Oracle, but like,
Okay.
kind of like there's quite a rich community around it, but not in the same way that like with open source, really. And so if you found someone who had the similar problems to you, that'd be kind of great, and you would look at it together. But if not, you would be completely beholden to Oracle Support Portal. And so there was something weird that went on with the materialized views, and it was just one of these things where all you could do was like run this thing and poke the black box and see if you could get it to react differently to it. And it was to do with like kind of partitions. You'd refresh the partition and it'd be really, really slow. And it's that thing where you start going through the manual and it's like, well, it's not behaving how it should do in the manual. But because of the volumes of data, you try and reproduce it. It's much more difficult to reproduce unless it's in production. And if it's in production, you can't just go mucking around with stuff. Yeah. But that was good. And that kind of actually got me started blogging, because I found these things that they weren't in the manuals, they weren't on the support portal. I was like, well, I kind of found that useful, so I'm going to write it up. And then it was really cool, actually. There's a guy called Doug, I think it was Doug Burns, I've forgotten his name, but he got in touch, and he was one of these guys, like, everyone knew who he was in the community, and he blogged as well, so I had read all of his stuff, and he dropped me a note, he's like, I've seen your blog, and I was like, oh my word, like, it's this guy, and he shared his knowledge that he'd found from this problem as well. In the end, I can't quite remember how we got around it. I think they probably tried to sell us Exadata or something, but it was just one of those things where it was kind of like a real tricky problem. You're working with different people on it. You get the support from the community. So that was a good one. I kind of solved it, but kind of didn't at the same time.
And with this type of experience, you kind of like took this mentality, I would say, right? So and start building community. What was the most interesting problem you solved with Kafka Connect and streaming? Maybe something more, the kids these days can relate, because people usually, you don't know what Oracle is, or they know what Oracle is because it turns out Oracle Cloud is probably the most popular cloud.
It turns out Oracle never went away.
Based on the earnings report from Oracle, looks like the Oracle Cloud is killing.
Oracle's doing just fine.
Yeah.
And with Kafka, I think probably the one that most people will know me for based on blog views is around Kafka and listeners. So this wasn't so much solving a problem, it was just understanding how a thing worked. So it's the kind of thing that for a lot of people is a problem. So there's a setting, this is actually putting me to the test here because it's a while since I looked at it, but if I remember rightly, within Kafka, you've got a listener, which is where you've got the broker and the clients, and talk to the broker through the listener. So like it's on this particular host or IP on this particular port. And because Kafka is distributed, you've got multiple brokers. So when the client initially connects to the broker tells it, like, you'll find me at this address. Which if you're just running it if it's been set up and configured, someone gives you the broker and you connect to the broker and that's all great. But if you're running this for yourself, like you're just installing it on your laptop, and particularly, and this is why it became such an issue, if you're running it within Docker, the networking suddenly comes into play. On your laptop, you'll probably get away with it, and you just hard code everything to a loopback address, and it's fine.
I think it's also worth to mention that this problem also usually comes when you try to run more than one Kafka broker. And probably even one, there would be some issues, especially inside the Docker.
Just one will do it.
Yeah.
So it comes about if you run your Kafka broker inside a Docker container and then try and connect a client to it, either from the host machine or from another Docker container that's not networked correctly to it, because it will reach into it. It will say go connect to that container. But then from within the container, the broker says, oh, well, this is my address, which will just be a little local Docker thing. So then you'd see all these awful solutions on the internet, and this is the downside of people sharing stuff on the internet, is that sometimes it's complete junk. And they'd be like, oh, well, just go in and hard code your etc. hosts file to hard code this thing. It's no, that's and people will be taking that and then well, let's just move that through into production because I found this thing on the internet that says it, which is awful.
That's how we're doing this these days. Yeah, just find the internet and after that move to production.
So ChatGPT, tell me how to configure it.
Now probably it's a good thing that the ChatGPT know your blog post, so it
exactly.
will know how to configure this.
Go on. That's where advertised listeners comes in. So you've got the listener, which is the broker will listen on this particular part. Advertised listener is this is what the broker tells the client. This is where you can find me. You connected to this particular host, but the other nodes within this cluster are at this address. I hope I'm not butchering the explanation, but I wrote a good blog about it. If you actually hit this problem and need to find out more, but that was one of the most satisfying ones, because it was one of these ones, you could tell with the materialized view thing. I understood it more, but I never quite nailed it because it wasn't this is a piece of Oracle software. You're never going to quite get to the depths of it. Whereas with the Kafka thing, it made sense. It wasn't broken. It was just getting that understanding. And then once you get the understanding, it all falls into place and it's completely logical. And a ton of people have that problem and benefited from that write-up. So that was a satisfying one to fix or to figure out.
And it was not like you said, it was not the problem. It's just like the bar to configure this was a little bit higher. So we as a DevRels, we had to bring the people higher in order to make sure they know how to fix this problem and know what's the difference. Developers of this the project Apache Kafka, they were smart in order to come up with this interesting solution and kind of like they knew that it's going to be running in some weird situations like inside containers, and there would be some networking situation that's going on. It's always networking situation going on with distributed systems. Have you encouraged or encounter something similar in something interesting when you were doing a lot of the Kafka Connect evangelism, and like specifically many people, at least I remember from the 12 days of SMTs. So it's another interesting thing because it's there, it's available, but not many people knew this, and people usually come with this type of questions. I have a problem like this, how I can solve this, and they try to solve they're trying to look for the question, right? So they're trying to say how I can do blah with Kafka Connect, or how I can do blah with Kafka. And I remember that's kind of like one of the discussions that we had when we were building Kafka tutorials, as a matter of fact. So, and we also have this idea that, okay, so what if the people would be the Googling particular solution, right? How to do this. Can you recall some of the interesting things that you did during that time?
Yeah, so I think with Kafka Connect, kind of similar to the listeners thing, it was like this thing works, it just isn't particularly well understood in the community, and that was with the converters. So this idea that Kafka messages are just bytes, and particularly coming from a database background, that just hurt my head. Like this idea that you just store bytes, because I'm like, well, where's my schema? Where's my kind of columns? And so the way that Kafka Connect, and I think it's a very clever way it's being built, because it separates out all of these different considerations, and it means it's completely pluggable.
Yes.
But this idea that you could take data from a database and store it in a Kafka message, and something needs to work out, like how are you going to take those columns and write them as a bunch of bytes? So do you store your data in like Avro or JSON or protobuf, whatever? But then how do you handle the schema within that? Particularly people would use JSON, still use JSON, and they'll look at that and they'll eyeball it. It's like, well, it's got a schema. And it's like, well, yes, but no, it hasn't actually. It's not got like an explicitly declared schema. So understanding and like writing a lot, and like lots of stuff on Stack Overflow and on blogs and helping people on the forums and the Confluent community Slack group. Just like if you put this converter in place, if you tell Kafka Connect you're using this converter like to get data in, it's not going to like change it for you. So like if you've written, you're getting data into Kafka Connect, it's going to go and write it out as JSON if you tell it to, but it's going to throw the schema away. So then when you try and like plug a Kafka Connect sync into that, it doesn't actually have an explicit schema. So if you then want to write it to some kind of columnar storage or tabular storage, it needs that schema from somewhere. So just those kind of making the things line up and making people understand, if you've got Avro going in and you want JSON going out, how to actually configure it to do that, and how to handle the schemas. And then everyone's favorite magic byte problem.
Yes.
So like the way that Kafka Connect is built is very, very good. I think some of the error messages are esoteric, kind of like less, not so user friendly. So things like when you,
it's a good word. Yeah.
Yeah. If you give Kafka Connect and you're building a sink and you want to get data from Kafka into some place like Iceberg, whatever, if you've got data in a Kafka topic that's serialized in Avro using the Confluent schema registry, it puts on the front of the message like these little magic bytes that tell it what the schema ID is and whatever. And unless you configure Kafka Connect correctly, you get this like unknown magic bytes. So you get that if it's not Avro data and you try and read it with an Avro converter. The fact that even I'm getting mixed up with it, and I've written lots about this, goes to show it's one of these things that it's arguably more difficult than it has to be, but it is very, very flexible. That's the flip side of it.
I think you're right in terms of flexibility of the things. When you're trying to do things like generic enough or like cover multiple corner cases, which I think that's the beauty of Kafka ambiguity and how it can be used. But also it's a little bit of curse. I think I don't wanna sound as a kind of like a self-proclaiming the solver of this problem, but that's what we do in DevRel. There's a product that does incredible things, and we're trying to identify the points where we can show some of the things and explain, so the people will have less problems with serialization. Thankfully, right now we do have enough materials to cover this, so even LLMs will give you right results. So I think our job was done very well here. And I think one of the things that I want to ask you before we kind of like wrap this, do you have any kind of maybe a recommendation for people who are trying to solve, what your kind of the way approaching solving the hard problems? I think when you gain certain experience of the things, you're not looking to the problems, I don't know how to do this. You approaching this with slightly, okay, so let me see what I know, how much I know for this in order to approach this. And I'm going to this FI type of approach that we usually employ. Unfortunately, I cannot say this out loud, but IYK.
Indeed. Yeah, and when it comes to working with hard things, it's kind of, I think taking a methodical approach is essential. There's that quote from Linus Torvalds, isn't there, about the kind of the random jiggling of things until they unbreak, which is just brilliant. It's like you can like muck around and find out, but in the end, you really have to like start with what you know, and sometimes there's a bit of like random jiggling, but it's doing so in a kind of a constrained manner, and you kind of, I changed this thing, what impact did that have? And then move on to the next thing, and not starting with any assumptions. And that's why I find writing stuff up so useful, because that's how I tend to think, is like, I'll write this thing down, and if I don't know an explanation of why I've written that down, then I need to go and understand that thing.
Or this, like when this loop could fully close, or someone will read your material, and maybe you will help someone, but there will be someone who knows more about the subject, and they will reach out and help you out to saying, hey, I want to point out it's a good blog post. Here's one thing that I would add or change, because this is not like in the very beginning how you start talking about your materialized view problems, and someone show up and also either shared your blog or read this and give it a go.
No, exactly. It's and that's one of the great things about sharing stuff publicly, whether it's kind of as part of our jobs in DevRel or just like writing stuff up on the side. It benefits everyone.
All right, folks. Thank you, Robin, for being a part of Confluent Developer. We will put some links in show notes. Don't forget to follow Robin in social media. I guess right now it's mostly LinkedIn.
Blue Sky. Blue Sky is where it's at.
Or Blue Sky. Blue Sky is not bad. Like there's some good communities, like data engineering communities in Blue Sky. So please follow Robin in social media. Please follow Confluent Developer. Check out our YouTube channel with the interviews from the luminaries in around the world who are talking about their experiences of building stuff or maybe breaking stuff. My name is Viktor Gamov, and as always, have a nice day.
Cheers, Vic.